The morning mist clung to Mogollon Rim like a widow's veil, thick and gray and unwilling to let go. It was October in northern Arizona, 1955, and the aspens had turned the color of old gold coins, the kind men found in their grandfathers' pockets and never spent. The air smelled of pine resin and coming snow, that peculiar scent that made old bones ache with memory. Ezra McAllister sat in his rocking chair on the cabin porch, watching the sun try to burn through the fog. He was 78 years old. His beard had gone white as winter birch, thick and wild, untrimmed for months. His hands, resting on the chair's worn arms, were the hands of a man who had built things and broken things and buried things. Scars ran across the knuckles like dried creek beds. The calluses were so thick they looked like leather stretched over bone. His eyes, pale blue and watery with age, stared out at the canyon below, at the place where the Apache used to make their camps before the government drove them onto reservations. He held a tin cup of coffee, black and bitter, the way he had drunk it for 50 years. Steam rose from the cup in lazy spirals, dissipating into the cold mountain air. He did not drink. He just held it, feeling the warmth against his palms, letting his mind drift backward, the way old men's minds always drift, toward the places where the ghosts lived and memories refused to fade. The cabin behind him was old now, as old as he was. The logs had weathered to silver gray. The roof sagged in the middle where the ridgepole had settled over decades of heavy snow. The windows were small and thick with grime. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, carrying the smell of burning pine and coffee grounds. This place had been his refuge for nearly half a century, his fortress, his prison. There were stories a man carried his whole life, not because they were too beautiful to forget, because they were too heavy to share. The sound of an engine broke the morning silence. Ezra did not turn his head. He knew that sound. A jeep, old and badly maintained, grinding up the mountain road that switchbacked through the ponderosa pines. The transmission whined on the steep grades. The engine knocked and sputtered. Only one person would make that drive this early on a Saturday morning. Only one person still bothered to visit a hermit on a mountaintop. The jeep came into view 5 minutes later, dust trailing behind it like a brown ribbon torn from the earth. It pulled to a stop near the woodpile, engine coughing twice before dying with a shudder. 2 doors opened. The first person out was Reverend Samuel Hutchins, 65 years old, white-haired, wearing his collar, even on a day when no services were scheduled. He moved stiffly, favoring his left leg, the one that had taken shrapnel in France back in 1918. The second person was a boy, 16, maybe 17, tall and gangly, with dark hair that needed cutting and uncertain eyes that took in everything. Ezra set down his coffee cup on the porch railing. The metal made a soft clink against the wood. The boy looked at the cabin, at the sagging porch, at the old man in the rocking chair, and something in his face said he had been told stories but did not quite believe them. Young people never believed the stories, not until they grew old enough to have their own. The Reverend put a hand on the boy's shoulder, a gesture both reassuring and guiding, and they walked forward together, boots crunching on the gravel that Ezra had spread there 20 years ago. "Morning, Ezra," the Reverend said. His voice was warm, practiced, the voice of a man who had spent 40 years comforting the grieving and challenging the comfortable. Ezra nodded. His voice, when it came, sounded like stones grinding together. "Samuel," the Reverend gestured to the boy beside him. "This is Thomas McAllister, your brother's grandson." The boy stepped forward, extending his hand the way young men did when they had been taught manners by mothers who still believed in such things. His grip was uncertain, seeking approval. Ezra looked at the hand for a long moment, studying the smooth skin, the clean fingernails, the absence of scars. Then he took it. The grip was firm enough. Good. The boy had some backbone, even if he did not know it yet. "Sir," Thomas said. Ezra released his hand and looked him over with the careful assessment of a man who had spent a lifetime reading other men. The boy had the McAllister build, broad shoulders that would fill out in a few years, a strong jaw that spoke of stubbornness, hands that were large but not yet roughened by real work. But his eyes were softer than Ezra's had ever been. He had not seen what Ezra had seen. Not yet. Maybe he never would. That would be a blessing. "You drove a long way," Ezra said. "Yes, sir. From Flagstaff." 3 hours. "Yes, sir. About that." Ezra looked at the Reverend, a question in his eyes that did not need words. "You tell him why he's here?" Ezra asked. "Some of it," the Reverend said carefully. "Not all. That's your story to tell, Ezra, not mine." Thomas shifted his weight from one foot to the other, glancing between the two old men, sensing undercurrents he could not quite identify. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something wrapped in faded blue cloth. He unwrapped it carefully, reverently, the way a person handles something precious. It was a bracelet. Turquoise stones set in tarnished silver, strung on braided leather that had faded from red to rust brown with age. The workmanship was old, traditional, unmistakably Apache. Ezra's chest tightened. The air went out of his lungs. For a moment, he was not 78 years old, sitting on a porch in 1955. He was 32 again, standing in a snowstorm, watching a woman ride away with his heart in her saddlebags. "Where did you get that?" he asked, his voice sharper than he intended, cracking on the last word. "Grandma Clara left it for me," Thomas said, "in her will. She died 5 years ago, in the spring of 1950. "I know when she died, boy." "Yes, sir. I'm sorry." Thomas held out the bracelet, offering it like a peace token. "There was a letter with it. She said I should bring it to you. She said you would know what it meant." Ezra stared at the bracelet. He had not seen it in 46 years. Not since the winter of 1909. Not since the day she rode away and took his heart with her, and left him with nothing but mountains and memories, and a promise he had kept, even when it broke him. He reached out slowly, his hand trembling slightly, took the bracelet from the boy's hand, turned it over in his scarred fingers. The turquoise was still bright, still caught the morning light. The silver still gleamed beneath the tarnish. Time had not dulled it. Time never dulled the things that mattered. "There was more in the letter," Thomas said quietly, watching Ezra's face. "She said I should ask you about someone named Naya." The name hit Ezra like a fist to the gut. He closed his eyes, took a breath that rattled in his chest, opened them again, and looked at the mountains, at the canyon, at the place where it had all happened. "Sit down," he said. The Reverend and Thomas took seats on the porch steps, settling themselves on the worn wood. Ezra stayed in his rocking chair, the bracelet resting in his palm like a live coal, burning him with memory. For a long time, no one spoke. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals that rose from the warming canyon. Somewhere in the forest, a branch cracked under its own weight and fell to the forest floor with a distant crash. The wind moved through the aspens, making them whisper secrets to each other. Finally, Ezra spoke. "Your grandmother was a good woman," he said, his voice softer now, gentler. "Patient, kind. She loved me, even though she knew I carried someone else in my heart. We had 31 years together. Good years, mostly. I never told her everything, but she knew. Women always know. They see things men try to hide." He looked at Thomas, really looked at him, seeing not just a boy, but a continuation, a legacy that stretched backward and forward through time. "She wanted you to hear this story before I died. She was right. A man should know where he comes from, even if the truth isn't pretty, especially if it isn't pretty." He held up the bracelet, letting it dangle from his fingers, the turquoise stones catching the light. "This belonged to a woman named Naya Dalla," he said.
An Apache woman. She gave it to me in the winter of 1909, the night before I thought I would die. It belonged to her father before that, a medicine man named Cocheta. The wise owl, they called him. He was a great man, a keeper of old knowledge. He died trying to protect something sacred, and I helped finish what he started. Thomas leaned forward, his young face intent. "What happened?" Ezra looked past him, past the porch, past the canyon, past the mountains, into the place where memory lived and time did not heal all wounds. "It was a long time ago," he said, 46 years, but I remember it like it was yesterday. I remember the cold. I remember the snow. I remember the way she looked at me the first time, like I was something she should kill, but couldn't quite bring herself to. I remember everything." The mist began to lift from the canyon. The sun broke through in shafts of gold, illuminating the aspens so they glowed like candles. And Ezra McAllister, 78 years old, with white hair and scarred hands, and a heart still broken after nearly half a century, began to tell the story he had never told. The story he had carried alone for 46 years. The story that had made him who he was. He began with the snow, Arizona, winter 1909. Ezra was 32 years old then, though he felt older. He had been living alone on Mogollon Rim for 8 years, ever since the day he walked away from the army and swore on his mother's grave that he would never raise a rifle for the government again. His cabin sat in a narrow cleft between 2 ridges of red sandstone, hidden from the valley below, accessible only by a single trail that switchbacked through jumbled rocks and twisted juniper trees. It was a good place to disappear, and Ezra had wanted to disappear. He was a big man, even then, 6'2", 200 pounds of muscle and scar tissue earned through hard living. His beard was black and thick as bear fur, his hair long and tied back with a strip of leather cut from a deer he had killed. He wore buckskin and wool, clothes that could take a beating and keep him alive when the temperature dropped below zero and the wind came howling down from the peaks like something with teeth. He moved through the wilderness like a shadow, silent and sure-footed, leaving no more trace than a ghost. The settlers in the valley below called him Mountain Ghost when they spoke of him at all. They said he could track a man through solid rock. They said he had Apache blood in his veins. They were wrong about the blood, but they were right about the tracking. Ezra had learned to track from the Apache, before the wars, before San Carlos, before everything went to hell, and he learned that governments lied and orders could be evil, and a man had to choose between duty and decency. He tried not to think about San Carlos, but San Carlos thought about him. Every night in his dreams, San Carlos found him. His only companion was a horse, a stallion, gray-black like storm clouds, 14 years old, with a scar that ran from shoulder to foreleg.
a memento from a Comanche lance in West Texas, back when Ezra was still young enough to think he was immortal. Ezra called him Iron, not because of his color, because nothing could break him, not weather, not distance, not fear. Iron was the most loyal creature Ezra had ever known, more loyal than any man, more honest than any woman, except one. Iron was standing in the lean-to beside the cabin, stamping his hooves against the frozen ground, breath steaming in the cold December air. It was late afternoon, the sun already sinking behind the western peaks, painting the snow orange and red. The temperature was dropping fast. Ezra could feel it in his bones, that deep ache that came when the mercury plunged toward zero. He was splitting firewood outside the cabin, the axe rising and falling in a steady rhythm that kept his blood moving and his hands from freezing. Split, stack, split, stack. The work kept his body busy, kept his mind from wandering to places it should not go. Then Iron stopped eating. Ezra noticed immediately. A horse that stops eating hay in the middle of winter is a horse that senses something wrong. Danger, predator, something out of place in the natural order. He set down the axe, wiped the sweat from his forehead despite the cold, walked to the lean-to with the careful deliberation of a man who had survived by paying attention to details. Iron's ears were pricked forward, swiveling like compass needles, searching for true north. His nostrils flared, pulling in great drafts of air, testing it for scents Ezra's dull human nose could never detect. He was staring south, toward the mouth of the canyon, toward the valley below, where civilization pressed against wilderness.
"What is it, boy?" Ezra asked quietly, placing a hand on Iron's muscled neck. Iron huffed, a sharp sound, almost like a bark of alarm. Then he pawed at the ground, once, twice, 3 times, urgent, insistent. His whole body was tense, coiled like a spring, ready to release. Ezra had learned to trust Iron's instincts 8 years ago, the day the horse had saved his life by refusing to cross a frozen river that looked solid but was not. In all the years since, the horse had never been wrong. If Iron said something was out there, something was out there. And if it worried Iron, it should worry Ezra. He went back into the cabin, moving quickly now, pulled on his heavy sheepskin coat that smelled of smoke and sweat, checked his Winchester rifle, made sure the action was clean and the magazine was full, slung a coil of hemp rope over his shoulder, grabbed the kerosene lantern from its hook by the door. The temperature was already dropping fast. By midnight, it would be 10 below zero, maybe colder. Nothing survived a night like that without shelter and fire. Not even the hardiest Apache. Not even a mountain man who knew every trick of survival. He saddled Iron quickly, his hands moving by memory in the fading light, buckling the cinch, adjusting the stirrups, making sure everything was secure. Iron stood still, but his muscles were tight, bunched under the winter coat. Ready to move, ready to run if needed. "All right," Ezra said, swinging into the saddle. "Show me what you found." He gave Iron his head. The horse needed no urging. He turned south without hesitation and started down the trail at a ground-eating trot, sure-footed even on the icy rocks that lined the narrow path. Ezra let him lead. The horse knew where he was going. Horses always knew. They descended into the canyon as the last light drained from the sky like water from a broken cup. The air grew colder with every foot of elevation they lost. Snow began to fall, not heavy, but steady, the flakes small and hard, driven by a wind that cut through wool and leather like a blade through paper. Ezra pulled his scarf over his nose and mouth, felt the fabric grow damp with his breath, and then freeze stiff against his skin. His eyes watered from the wind. He could barely see 10 feet ahead through the swirling white. Iron did not slow. He moved with purpose, following something Ezra could not see or smell or hear. A scent, maybe, or a sound too faint for human ears. Or something else, something horses knew that men did not. They crossed a frozen creek where the ice groaned under Iron's weight, but held. They climbed a steep ridge where loose shale clattered beneath hooves. They dropped into a narrow ravine where the wind howled like wolves and the snow piled in drifts taller than a man. Then Iron stopped. They were standing at the mouth of Redstone Canyon, a narrow cleft between two high walls of sandstone that glowed rust-red even in the failing light. The canyon walls rose straight up for 200 feet on either side, creating a natural corridor that ran for maybe a quarter mile before ending in a box of sheer cliffs. Ezra had been here before. He knew this place. It was a dead end. The canyon ran deep and then stopped. Nothing lived back there. Nothing should be back there in winter. Iron lowered his head and sniffed the snow at his feet. Then he pawed again, harder this time, scraping away the powder with his hoof, exposing what lay beneath. Ezra dismounted, his boots crunching in the snow, and knelt beside the spot Iron had uncovered. The ground beneath the snow was dark, not rock, not frozen earth. Blood. Fresh blood, still wet enough to stain his glove when he touched it. Ezra brought his fingers to his nose, inhaled carefully. The smell was unmistakable. Not animal blood. He had smelled enough animal blood in his life to know the difference. This was human, maybe an hour old, still warm enough to have melted the snow it touched. He looked up, scanning the darkness ahead. In the snow, barely visible in the fading light, were tracks. Small tracks, the kind a woman might make. But these were not made by boots. These were barefoot prints, the toes splayed wide, the heel dug deep. Who the hell walks barefoot through a blizzard? He stood, took the lantern from his saddle, lit it with shaking hands that had nothing to do with the cold. The match flared, caught the wick, and steadied into a warm, yellow glow. He raised the lantern high, casting a circle of light into the darkness. The tracks led deeper into the canyon, weaving slightly, the stride uneven. Whoever made them was hurt, weak, dying. "Stay close," he told Iron. They moved forward together, man and horse, the lantern swinging with each step, the light casting wild shadows on the stone walls that danced like demons. The wind screamed down the canyon, funneling between the walls, carrying snow that stung like thrown sand. Ezra could feel the cold creeping through his coat, into his bones, settling in his chest. His breath came in short, hard gasps that froze in his beard. Then he saw her. She was half buried in a snowdrift against the North Canyon wall, her body curled in a tight fetal ball, arms wrapped around something. Her skin was gray-blue, the color of a drowned corpse. Her lips were purple, cracked and bleeding. Her hair, black as a raven's wing, was braided in the traditional Apache style and frozen stiff as rope. She wore a torn sheepskin coat, soaked through with melted snow and crusted with ice that glittered in the lantern light. One arm was flung out from her body, fingers clawed into the snow as if she had been trying to crawl forward even as the cold took her. Ezra dropped to his knees beside her, ignoring the snow that soaked through his pants. He tore off his glove with his teeth, pressed 2 fingers to her throat, searching for the pulse point. Nothing. He waited, counted to 10 in his head, forced himself to be patient. There, a pulse, faint as a whisper, slow as the drip of water from an icicle. barely there, but there. She was alive. Somehow, impossibly, she was alive. He looked past her to the bundle in her arms, and his heart stopped. 3 shapes lay pressed against her body, small and dark and unmoving. At first he thought they were puppies or wolf cubs. Then he saw the legs, 2 long and delicate, ending in small hooves, the tiny muzzles, the folded ears. Horses, newborn foals, 3 of them, each no bigger than a hunting dog.
They were pressed tight against the woman's sides, seeking warmth from a body that had no warmth left to give. Their coats were soaked through, plastered to skin so thin Ezra could see the ribs beneath. Their eyes were half closed, glazed with the glassy stare of approaching death. One of them, the smallest, pure white as fresh snow, was not breathing at all. Ezra's mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. A woman, 3 foals, no mare, no other tracks except the woman's barefoot prints. Someone had left them here. Someone had left them to die, where no one would find them. Someone had meant for the winter to erase them completely. He reached out with a trembling hand, touched the white foal's chest. Cold, still as stone. No, not this one. Not after she fought to protect it. He bent down, pressed his mouth to the foal's tiny nose, blew a hard breath into its lungs, forcing air where there was none. Once, twice, 3 times. He pulled back, waited, watching. Nothing. He tried again, harder this time, filling those small lungs with everything he had. The foal twitched. Just the smallest movement, a tremor that ran through its body. He blew again, desperation making him rough. The foal's chest rose on its own. Its eyes fluttered open, revealing dark pupils ringed with white. It gasped, a small, desperate sound like a kitten's cry, and began to breathe in shallow, rapid pants. "That's it," Ezra whispered. "Come on, little one. Stay with me." He turned his attention to the woman. She still had not moved. He slid his arms under her body, one beneath her shoulders, one beneath her knees, lifted her carefully. She weighed almost nothing, like lifting a child or a bundle of kindling. Her head lolled against his chest, the black braid brushing his chin. He could feel how cold she was even through his coat, cold as the stone walls around them. He carried her to Iron, who stood waiting with the patience of mountains, ears flat against the wind. Ezra draped her across the saddle, wrapped her in the heavy bison-hide blanket he kept rolled and tied behind the cantle. The blanket was thick enough to stop a knife. It would have to be enough to hold what little life she had left. Then he went back for the foals. He took off his sheepskin coat, spread it on the ground, ignoring the way the cold immediately sank its teeth into him through his wool shirt. He gathered the 3 tiny bodies as gently as he could and placed them in the center of the coat. The white one, barely breathing, her tiny ribs fluttering like bird wings. The gray one, with pale blue eyes, so pale they looked almost white, shivering violently, her whole body racked with tremors. The darker gray one, stronger than her sisters, trying to stand on legs that buckled and collapsed under her weight. He wrapped the coat around them carefully, tied it with the rope, creating a bundle he could carry, then slung it over his shoulder. The cold hit him like a physical blow. Without the coat, the wind tore through his wool shirt, found every gap, every opening, froze the sweat on his skin until it felt like ice water running down his spine. He gritted his teeth until his jaw ached, climbed back into the saddle behind the woman, adjusted the bundle of foals in his lap so he could hold them against his chest. "Home," he said to Iron, his voice barely audible over the wind. "Fast as you can, boy." Iron turned and began to climb out of the canyon. The wind screamed louder now, as if angry at being denied its victims. The snow fell harder, driving horizontally, erasing the trail even as they climbed it. Ezra bent over the woman and the foals, trying to shield them with his body, trying to give them what little warmth he had left. He could feel the woman's faint breath against his chest, could feel the foals trembling in the bundle, could feel his own body starting to fail as the cold worked its way deeper. Do not die.
Not yet. Not after I found you. Stay alive just a little longer. The ride back to the cabin was a nightmare journey through white darkness. The trail disappeared completely under the snow. Ezra could not see his own hand in front of his face. He let Iron navigate by instinct, trusting the horse to remember what his frozen brain could not. His hands went numb despite the gloves. His face burned with cold until it stopped burning and went numb too. He lost all feeling in his feet. The world narrowed to the bundle in his arms and the woman against his chest, and the rhythm of Iron's hooves crunching through snow. Then, through the swirling white chaos, he saw it. A light. Warm and yellow and impossibly distant. The cabin. He had left a lamp burning in the window. That single flame was calling them home. Iron staggered into the clearing, sides heaving like bellows, foam freezing white on his chest and flanks. Ezra half fell out of the saddle, barely caught himself, pulled the woman down from Iron's back, carried her to the door. He kicked it open with his boot, stumbled inside into warmth and lamplight, laid her on the bearskin rug in front of the wood stove that still glowed with coals from the morning fire. Then he went back for the foals. He untied the coat bundle with fingers so numb he could barely feel the knots, spread it open on the floor beside the woman. The white foal was barely breathing, each breath a tiny gasp. The blue-eyed one was shaking so violently her teeth chattered. The dark gray one tried to lift her head and collapsed, too weak to even try again. Ezra threw 2 logs into the stove, opened the damper all the way. Flames roared to life, consuming the dry wood, sending heat pouring out into the cabin. He pulled off the woman's soaked coat, her frozen shirt that crackled with ice, wrapped her in dry wool blankets from his bed, tucked her as close to the stove as he dared. Her skin felt like marble under his hands, cold and smooth and lifeless. Her pulse was so faint he could barely feel it, like a moth's wing brushing his fingertips. He turned to the foals. He grabbed every towel he owned, began rubbing them down, hard and fast, forcing blood back into their tiny limbs, warming them with friction. The dark gray one responded first, her breathing deepening, becoming more regular. The blue-eyed one stopped shaking quite so badly. The white one just lay there, motionless except for those shallow gasps. No, not this one. Not after she fought so hard to live. He rubbed harder, blowing warm air directly on her muzzle, pressing gently on her tiny chest in the rhythm his mother had taught him for reviving drowned kittens. Come on, come on. Do not quit now. The foal's eyes opened fully. She looked directly at him with eyes that seemed too aware, too knowing. She took a breath on her own, deeper this time. Then another. Ezra sat back on his heels, panting like he had run a mile. All 3 foals were breathing, weak, fragile as soap bubbles, but alive. He turned his attention back to the woman. She had not moved since he laid her down. He crawled to her side on hands and knees, pressed his ear to her chest. Her heartbeat was slow but steady, a drum beating in the distance. He checked her hands, spreading the fingers, looking for the telltale white of severe frostbite. The fingertips were pale, but not dead white. She would keep them. He checked her feet. Same thing, pale but salvageable. Then he saw the bruises. They covered her throat in a pattern that made his stomach turn. 5 distinct marks. Finger marks. Someone had wrapped their hand around her throat and squeezed. Hard. Hard enough to leave bruises that went bone deep. There were more bruises on her ribs, dark purple and black, the kind that came from boots or rifle butts. Her left wrist bore a deep circular cut, raw and infected, the kind left by leather bindings pulled tight enough to cut through skin. Her back, when he gently turned her to check, was covered in slash marks, some scabbed over, some still seeping. Someone had done this to her. Someone had beaten her, bound her, tortured her, and then left her in the snow to die, where no one would ever find her body. Ezra's jaw tightened until his teeth ached. His hands clenched into fists. A cold rage settled in his chest, colder than the blizzard outside, harder than the iron his horse was named for. Outside, iron whinnied. Not his normal sound. A warning, sharp and urgent. Ezra stood, crossed to the window on stiff legs, looked out into the darkness. 3 riders were approaching through the snow, visible only as dark shapes against white. Moving slowly but deliberately. Following the trail Iron had broken coming back to the cabin, heading straight for the door. He watched them come, watched them stop 50 yards out, just at the edge of the clearing. One of them, the one in front, raised a hand and pointed at the cabin, said something Ezra could not hear over the wind. The other 2 nodded. Then all 3 turned their horses and rode back the way they had come, disappearing into the swirling snow like ghosts. But they would be back. Ezra knew it with the certainty of a man who had tracked other men, who understood how hunters thought. They would be back when they had more men, more guns, when the odds were better. He stood at the window for a long time, watching the snow fall, watching the darkness where the riders had disappeared, his mind already working through possibilities and preparations. What have I gotten myself into? He turned and looked at the woman on the floor, at the 3 tiny foals curled beside her, at the bruises and blood and broken things he had dragged out of the winter. And he knew, with the same certainty, that he would not let them take her, would not let them take the foals. Whatever was coming, whoever those men were, whatever they wanted, they would have to go through him to get it. He had stood aside once before and watched evil happen. At San Carlos. He had stood and watched while women and children died because he was following orders, because he was afraid to disobey, because he told himself it was not his choice to make. He would not stand aside again. Not this time. Not ever again. The woman did not wake that night. Ezra stayed beside her, feeding the fire every hour, checking her pulse, adjusting the blankets, wiping the sweat from her forehead when fever took her in the small hours of morning. The foals slept fitfully, whimpering in their dreams, their small bodies twitching. Iron stood just outside the door, refusing to go to the lean-to where the hay and grain waited, standing guard in the snow, his breath steaming in the freezing air. Ezra did not sleep. He sat in his chair by the window, rifle across his knees, watching the door, watching the darkness, waiting. At dawn, the woman's eyes opened. She stared at the ceiling for a moment, her face blank with confusion. Then memory crashed back, and her body jerked. She tried to sit up. Pain exploded across her ribs, and she gasped, a sound like tearing cloth, collapsed back onto the rug, one hand clutching her side. "Easy," Ezra said, standing slowly, raising both hands so she could see they were empty. "You are safe here." Her head whipped toward his voice. Her eyes were black, blacker than her hair, filled with a mix of terror and fury and something harder: survival. The look of someone who had learned not to trust.
She tried to speak, but her voice came out as a rasp, broken glass in her throat. She swallowed, tried again. "Who are you?" The words were thick with accent, shaped by a language that was not English. "My name is Ezra McAllister. This is my cabin. I found you last night in Redstone Canyon. You were dying. You and the Foals." "The Foals," she repeated, and her eyes went wide. She looked around frantically, searching. Then she saw them, curled together near the stove, their small sides rising and falling. Her expression broke like a dam giving way. Tears spilled down her bruised cheeks. She reached out with a shaking hand, as if to touch them from across the room. "They are alive," Ezra said quietly. "Barely, but alive." The white one stopped breathing. I got her back. The woman closed her eyes. Her lips moved, whispering words in a language Ezra recognized but did not fully understand. Apache. A prayer, maybe. Or a thanks to whatever gods still listened. When she opened her eyes again, they fixed on him with an intensity that made him want to look away. "You speak my language?" she asked, switching to Apache. Ezra answered slowly, carefully, his Apache rusty and clumsy from years of disuse. "A little. I learned long ago. I have not spoken it in many years." "You were a soldier," she said. Not a question, a statement of fact. "Yes." "You killed my people." "Yes." Her face hardened like clay drying in the sun. She tried to sit up again, teeth clenched against the pain, refusing to show weakness. This time she made it, pushing herself upright with trembling arms, leaning her back against the log wall. She sat there, breathing hard, one hand pressed to her broken ribs. She looked at the Foals again, then at Ezra. Her eyes traveled over his face, his beard, his rough clothes, taking his measure. "Why did you save us?" she asked. "Because you needed saving." "That is not an answer. It is the only one I have." They stared at each other across the small cabin. Silence stretched between them, heavy and fragile as old ice. Outside, the wind had died. The snow had stopped. Morning light crept through the window, pale and cold, touching the frost flowers that had formed on the glass during the night. Finally, she spoke again. "My name is Naya," she said. "Naya Dala, daughter of Cocheta of the White Mountain Apache, keeper of the old songs." She gestured toward the Foals with her chin. "These are the last of the sacred ones, the wind horses. 3 days ago, men came to our camp in the mountains. They wanted the horses. My father refused. He told them the horses were not property. They were spirits given flesh." The men laughed. Their leader, a man who calls himself Colonel Sutton, shot my father in the chest while he stood protecting the mares. I watched him fall. I watched him die. Her voice did not break. It went flat, empty. The voice of someone who had cried all the tears they had and found the well dry. "I ran," she continued. "I took the 3 Foals and ran into the mountains. The men chased me. They have dogs, horses, guns. They caught me on the 2nd day. They beat me. One of them, a thin man with dead eyes, put his hands around my throat and squeezed until I could not breathe. Another kicked me in the ribs until I heard them crack. They tied my hands with leather so tight it cut to the bone. Then they argued about what to do with me. The colonel said to leave me. He said the winter would finish what they started. He said no one would find a body under the snow. They took my horse. They left me to die. But the foals. She looked at them, and for the first time her voice softened. The foals would not leave me. They stayed. They kept me warm as long as they could. Ezra felt something twist deep in his chest, somewhere beneath the scar tissue and calluses. "This Colonel Sutton," he said. "Why does he want the horses?" Naya looked at him for a long moment, as if deciding whether he could be trusted with the answer. Then she pushed herself to her feet, slowly, painfully, using the wall for support. She walked to where the foals lay sleeping and knelt beside them with a grace that pain could not completely destroy. She placed her hand on the white foal's forehead, just between the eyes. "Watch," she said. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, faintly, a mark began to appear on the foal's skin beneath her hand. A spiral, no bigger than a silver dollar, glowing with pale blue light that seemed to come from within the foal itself. The light pulsed gently, in rhythm with the tiny heartbeat. Ezra stared. He had seen many things in his 32 years. He had seen men die. He had seen the desert bloom after rain. He had seen the northern lights dance green and purple over Montana. But he had never seen anything like this. Naya moved her hand to the second foal, the one with blue eyes. The same spiral appeared, glowing softly. Then the third, the dark gray. The mark on her glowed brightest of all, pulsing stronger, more insistent. "The marks of the wind," Naya said quietly, reverently, "given by changing woman to the first of the people. These horses are not animals, white man. They are spirits wearing flesh. They run faster than any horse you have ever seen. They sense danger before it arrives. They live 3 times as long as normal horses. And they choose their riders. A wind horse cannot be broken, cannot be tamed. It must choose you. If it does not choose, it dies rather than serve." She stood, turned to face him, and the marks faded from the foals as if they had never been. "Colonel Sutton knows this. Someone told him. Someone who should not have spoken. He wants to breed them, sell them to rich men in the East who believe money can buy anything. He thinks if he takes the foals young enough, raises them in captivity, he can break their will before they are old enough to choose." Her voice filled with quiet rage. "He is wrong, but he will kill many trying." "And your father?" Ezra asked. "He was the keeper?" "He was the last who knew the old songs, the prayers that call the wind spirits into the foals when they are born. Without him, these 3 are the last. When they die, the bloodline dies. When the bloodline dies, a piece of my people dies with it." She looked him in the eyes. "That is why Sutton left me to die. I am the only other person who knows the songs. With me gone and my father dead, these 3 are just horses. Valuable horses, but just horses. The sacred dies with us." Ezra walked to the window, looked out at the snow-covered mountains, at the vast wilderness that was slowly being consumed by railroads and telegraph lines, and the unstoppable march of what men called progress. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because you saved us," Naya said simply, "and because you need to know what you are protecting. When Sutton comes back, and he will come back, he will not come alone. He will bring many men. He will burn this cabin to ashes if he has to. And you will have to decide if 3 horses and 1 Apache woman are worth dying for. Ezra turned from the window. He looked at her standing there, bruised and broken, but undefeated, protecting the foals with nothing but her body and her will. He looked at the three small creatures sleeping by the fire, carrying the weight of something sacred they did not yet understand. And he thought of San Carlos, of the women and children he had not protected, of the choice he had not made. 8 years ago, he said slowly, I was an Army scout in Arizona Territory. It was my job to track Apache, find their camps, lead the soldiers to them. I was good at it. The best, they said.
One morning in April, they sent me to a place called San Carlos. They told me we were relocating a small band, moving them peacefully to the reservation. I believed them. I wanted to believe them. So I led the column there at dawn. He stopped, swallowed, forced himself to continue. But it was not a relocation. It was a massacre. The soldiers had orders to kill everyone. Women, children, old people who could not run. I watched it happen. I stood there with my rifle, and I watched, and I did nothing. I told myself I was following orders, that it was not my choice, that I was just doing my job. His voice went rough. There was a girl, maybe 8 years old. She looked at me while she was dying. Just looked at me. And I saw it in her eyes. She was asking me why. Why I did not help. Why I let this happen. I have seen that look every night for 8 years. He met Naya's eyes. I left the army the next day, came up here, tried to outrun it. But you cannot outrun something like that. It follows you. It waits in the dark. It asks you the same question over and over. Why did you not act? Why did you stand aside? He gestured at her, at the Foals. So when I found you last night, when I saw what they had done to you, I did not think about risk. I did not think about Sutton or his men, or what might happen. I just knew one thing. I was not going to stand aside again. Not ever again. Naya studied him in silence, her face unreadable. Then she crossed the room and stood in front of him, so close he could see the flecks of gold in her black eyes. My father taught me something, she said quietly. He said that a man is not measured by his past, not by his mistakes, not by his failures. A man is measured by what he does after he falls. Does he stay down? Or does he stand up and try again to do what is right? She placed her hand over his heart, feeling it beat beneath scarred knuckles. You saved my life. You saved theirs. That is what matters. That is what I will remember. You forgive that easily? Ezra asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I do not forgive easily, she said, but I choose not to carry hate. Hate is a stone you tie to your own neck before jumping in the river. It drowns only you. She dropped her hand. You are not the soldiers who killed at San Carlos. You are the man who saved 3 lives in a snowstorm. Those are different men. Before Ezra could respond, Iron whinnied outside. Not his normal greeting, a warning, sharp, urgent, full of alarm. Both of them turned to the window as one. 3 riders were coming up the trail through the snow. The same 3 from last night. But now Ezra could see them clearly in the morning light. The man in front sat tall in the saddle, wearing a long dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat. Military bearing. The 2 behind him were harder to read, but the way they rode said violence and experience. They stopped at the edge of the clearing, 50 yards from the cabin door. The man in front looked directly at the window where Ezra stood. Even at this distance, Ezra could see his eyes were cold, calculating. the eyes of a man who took what he wanted and justified it later. Colonel Sutton had come calling, and the war Ezra had been running from for 8 years had finally caught up with him. The 3 riders sat motionless at the edge of the clearing, their horses stamping and blowing steam into the cold morning air. From the cabin window, Ezra could see them clearly now. The leader was a big man, broad-shouldered and straight-backed, despite what must have been 50 years of living. He wore a long wool coat that had once been Union blue, but had faded to the color of storm clouds. A cavalry hat sat square on his head. Even at 50 yards, Ezra could read the authority in the way he held himself. This was a man who had commanded other men, a man who expected to be obeyed.
Colonel James Sutton. Had to be. The 2 riders flanking him were cut from different cloth. The one on the left was thin as a knife blade, with a face that looked like it had been carved from yellowed bone. His eyes were set too close together, giving him the look of a predator bird. He wore buckskin and leather, the clothes of a man who lived rough, a tracker, a hunter, maybe a killer. The one on the right was built like a barn, thick through the chest and shoulders, with hands the size of dinner plates resting on his saddle horn. His face was flat and brutal, marked with old scars that said he had been in more than his share of fights and won most of them. Ezra felt Naya move up beside him at the window. She had gone very still, the way prey goes still when a hawk's shadow passes overhead. "The thin one," she whispered. "That is Wade Clemens. Rattlesnake, they call him. He is the one who put his hands around my throat." Her fingers unconsciously touched the bruises on her neck. "The big one is Dutch Keller. He kicked me, broke my ribs." Ezra's jaw tightened. He forced himself to breathe slowly, to think instead of react. 3 men, all armed, certainly. Probably experienced fighters. Sutton had the bearing of a career military man. Clemens looked like he had been killing things since he could walk. Keller was pure muscle and meanness. But they were out in the open, and Ezra was behind walls with a loaded rifle. "Get away from the window," he said quietly. "Take the Foals to the back room. Close the door. Do not come out no matter what you hear." Naya did not move. "I will not hide while you face them alone. You are in no condition to fight. You can barely stand." "I stood while they beat me. I can stand now." Ezra turned to look at her. Her face was set, determined, but he could see the pain in her eyes, the way she held herself stiffly to protect her broken ribs. She would be a liability in a fight. But he also saw something else. Pride. The kind of pride that would rather die than cower. "Please," he said, and the word came hard because he was not a man who said please often. "If they take you again, everything your father died for is lost. The Foals need you alive. I need you alive to tell me how to care for them." That reached her. She looked at the 3 small shapes sleeping by the stove, then back at him. Finally, she nodded. "If shooting starts, I am coming out," she said. "Fair enough." She gathered the Foals one by one, cradling them despite the pain it caused her ribs, and carried them into the small back room where Ezra slept. The door closed with a soft click. Ezra heard something heavy slide across the floor. She was barricading herself in. Good. He picked up his Winchester, checked the action one more time, made sure a round was chambered. Then he opened the cabin door and stepped out onto the porch. The cold hit him like a fist. The temperature had dropped further during the night. His breath came out in white clouds. The snow crunched under his boots, frozen solid. He stood on the porch,
rifle held loosely in both hands, not pointing at anyone, but ready to move fast. Sutton nudged his horse forward a few paces. The other two stayed where they were, flanking him, their hands resting casually near their weapons. "Good morning," Sutton called out. His voice was cultured, educated, with just a hint of Virginia aristocracy. "Beautiful morning after such an unpleasant storm." Ezra said nothing. Sutton smiled, a thin expression that did not reach his eyes. "You are Ezra McAllister, the mountain ghost. I have heard of you. The settlers in the valley speak of you with a certain respect. They say you were an army scout once, one of the best." Still Ezra said nothing. Silence was a weapon he had learned to use well. Sutton's smile faded slightly. "I am Colonel James Sutton. Perhaps you have heard of me as well. I served with distinction in the Apache campaigns. Now I am a businessman. Horses, primarily. Fine horses for discerning buyers." He paused, letting that settle. "I am looking for some property that was stolen from me. An Apache woman. 3 valuable horses. I have reason to believe you may have seen them." Ezra's voice, when he finally spoke, was flat as a stretched hide. "Have not seen anyone." "No?" Sutton's eyebrows rose. "That is unfortunate. You see, we tracked them to this very canyon last night. The trail led directly here, and then it stopped. Curious, is it not?" "Storm covered the tracks. Could have gone anywhere." "Could have," Sutton agreed, "but did not. Come now, Mr. McAllister. We are both men who have served, both men who understand duty. I am simply trying to recover my property. Surely you can understand that." "Your property," Ezra repeated, letting the words hang in the cold air. "Yes, the woman is a fugitive. She assaulted my men and stole horses that I purchased legally from her tribe. I have every right to recover what is mine." It was a lie. Ezra could hear it in the too smooth delivery, see it in the way Sutton sat just a little too casually in the saddle. This was a man accustomed to bending the truth to suit his purposes. "If she is here," Ezra said carefully, "and I am not saying she is, but if she were, seems to me she would have her own story about how things happened." Sutton's eyes went cold. The pretense of civility cracked just slightly. "I do not particularly care what story a savage tells. I care about my property. Now, I am going to ask you one more time, as a courtesy between men who have worn the uniform, is she here?" Ezra looked at him for a long moment. Then he spoke 2 words. "Get out." The thin man, Clemens, leaned forward in his saddle, his hand dropping to the revolver on his hip. "You making a mistake, mountain man." Ezra's rifle came up in one smooth motion, barrel pointing directly at Clemens's chest. "Your mistake would be drawing that gun." Clemens froze. Keller shifted his weight, calculating whether he could get his own weapon out before Ezra shot his partner. Sutton raised one hand, a calming gesture. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "no need for unpleasantness." He looked at Ezra with something approaching respect. "I see. You are a man of principle. I can admire that, even when it is misplaced. Very well. I am a reasonable man. I will give you 12 hours to reconsider. Think carefully about your choice, Mr. McAllister. That woman is wanted for theft and assault. Those horses are worth a considerable sum. If you are harboring them, you are breaking the law, and I have the resources to make that very uncomfortable for you." 12 hours, Ezra said. "Then what?" "Then I return with more men, many more men, and we will search this entire mountain if we have to. I would prefer to avoid that unpleasantness. But make no mistake, I will have what is mine."
Sutton reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a long iron spike, maybe 18 inches long, sharpened on one end and stamped with a large letter S on the head. Without breaking eye contact with Ezra, he rode his horse to the nearest pine tree, raised the spike, and drove it into the trunk with 3 hard blows from a small hammer. The ringing of metal on metal echoed across the clearing. "That," Sutton said, "is my mark. It means I am coming back. It means this mountain is mine by right of claim. And it means that anyone standing in my way when I return will be dealt with accordingly." He touched the brim of his hat in a mocking salute. 12 hours, Mr. McAllister. Use them wisely." He turned his horse and rode back down the trail. Clemens followed, but not before giving Ezra a look that promised violence. Keller was the last to leave, his flat eyes measuring Ezra the way a butcher measures a side of beef. Ezra stood on the porch long after they disappeared, rifle still in hand, watching the place where they had vanished into the trees. Iron came around from behind the cabin, snorting and pawing at the ground, agitated by the strangers. Finally, Ezra lowered the rifle and went back inside. Naya emerged from the back room before he could call for her. Her face was pale, her jaw set. "I heard," she said. "Then you know we do not have much time." "What will you do?" Ezra set the rifle down, moved to the stove, threw in more wood. The fire roared higher. "What I should have done at San Carlos. Stand and fight." "Against how many?" "However many he brings." Naya crossed to him, placed a hand on his arm. "This is not your fight. You saved us. That is enough. More than enough. Give me a horse. I will take the foals and go. Lead them away from here." "And go where? You can barely walk. The foals cannot run. He will track you down in a day." "Then I will hide. There are places in the mountains that white men do not know." "He has Apache trackers. Clemens looks like the type who can track a shadow across rock." "Then what do you suggest?" Ezra looked at her, at this woman who had lost her father and nearly her life, but still stood straight and spoke of fighting. He thought about the foals in the next room, carrying sacred spirits in their small bodies. He thought about Sutton's cold eyes and the way he had driven that spike into the tree like a man marking territory. "We prepare," he said. "We make this mountain into a place he wishes he had never found. And we make sure that if he comes back, it costs him more than he is willing to pay." "How?" "I know this land, every canyon, every ridge, every place where a man can hide or a trail can become a death trap. Sutton thinks he is fighting one old scout and an injured woman. He is wrong. He is fighting the mountain itself, and mountains do not surrender." For the first time since he had found her, Naya smiled. It was a small smile, tight with pain, but real. "My father would have liked you," she said. They spent the next 4 hours turning the cabin and the surrounding terrain into a fortress. Ezra moved with the efficiency of a man who had done this before, who had learned in hard schools how to defend a position against superior numbers. Naya helped where she could, though he could see each movement cost her. First, the approaches. There were 3 ways to reach the cabin. The main trail from the south, the way Sutton had come. A narrow game path from the east that wound through heavy timber. And a steep, rocky scramble from the north that only someone desperate or foolish would attempt. Ezra set tripwires across the main trail, strung between trees at ankle height, strong enough to bring down a running horse.
He positioned them where the trail narrowed, where riders would have to come single file.
A man moving carefully might see them. A man charging would not. He climbed to the high ground east of the cabin and positioned several large logs at the edge of a slope, wedging them in place with smaller rocks. A hard push or a well-aimed rifle shot would send them rolling down onto the trail below. 300 pounds of timber, moving fast, could break bones and scatter horses. The game path from the east ran through a boulder field. Ezra placed his 2 bear traps there, massive iron jaws designed to hold a grizzly. He covered them with pine needles and a dusting of snow. The placement was deliberate. A man on foot, moving carefully, could avoid them. A man on horseback, moving at any speed, would ride directly into them. Around the cabin itself, he strung thin cord between the trees, tying tin cans to the lines at irregular intervals. Not a defense, an alarm. Anyone moving through the trees at night would hit the cords, make the cans rattle. It would give him seconds of warning. Sometimes seconds were enough. He checked his ammunition. 40 rounds for the Winchester, 20 for his Colt revolver. Not enough for a sustained fight, but enough to make them think twice. Inside the cabin, he moved the heavy wooden table to block the window on the south side, leaving a gap just wide enough to shoot through. He filled buckets with water from the well and placed them around the room. If they tried to burn him out, he would need them. He laid out every tool that could be used as a weapon: the axe, a shovel with a sharpened edge, a length of chain, a hunting knife. While he worked, Naya told him about the wind horses. She sat by the fire, the 3 foals clustered around her, and spoke in a voice that was half story, half prayer. She told him about Changing Woman, the Holy Mother of the Apache, who had created the first horses from the morning mist that clung to the 4 sacred mountains. She told him how the horses were gifts, not possessions, spirits who chose to walk in flesh to help the people. She told him the old songs, the ones her father had taught her, the ones that called the wind into the foals when they were born. "Can you teach me?" Ezra asked. "The songs?" She looked at him with surprise. "You want to learn?" "If something happens to you, someone should know. Someone should be able to keep the tradition alive." "It takes years to learn the songs properly. We have hours." "Then teach me what you can." So she did. She sang in Apache, her voice low and rhythmic, and made him repeat the phrases until he could approximate the sounds, if not the meaning. The foals listened, their ears pricked forward, their eyes following Naya as if they understood every word. Maybe they did. When Ezra touched the white foal, the smallest one he had breathed life back into, she did not pull away. She leaned into his hand, her soft muzzle warm against his palm. The spiral mark on her forehead glowed faintly, just for a moment. "She has chosen you," Naya said softly. "Chosen me for what?" "To trust, to follow, to protect. A wind horse chooses only once in its life. If you betray that trust, the horse will die. It would rather cease to be than serve someone unworthy." Ezra looked down at the small creature, so fragile, carrying such weight. "I will not betray her." "I know," Naya said. "That is why she chose you." The sun was directly overhead when Naya finally asked the question that had been hanging between them since dawn. "Why did you leave the army after San Carlos?" Ezra was outside, checking the tripwires one last time. He stopped, his hands going still on the cord. "I told you. I could not stay after what I saw." "No, I mean, why did you leave that day? Most men would have finished their service, taken their pay, gone home to their families. You walked away with nothing.
You came to this mountain and stayed for 8 years, alone. Why? He straightened, looked out at the canyon, at the vast sweep of rock and sky. Because I knew if I stayed one more day, they would give me another order, and I did not trust myself to disobey. It is easier to avoid temptation than to resist it. So I removed myself from the situation entirely. You were afraid. Yes. Of what? Dying? No. Of becoming someone I could not live with. Of waking up one day and realizing I had become the kind of man who could watch children die and feel nothing. He turned to look at her. I was already halfway there. Another year in that uniform, and I would have crossed a line I could never come back from. Naya stood, moved to stand beside him, despite the pain it caused her. My father used to say that the bravest warriors are not the ones who never feel fear. They are the ones who feel it and act anyway. You felt yourself changing into something you hated, and you chose to change yourself instead. That takes courage. Does not feel like courage. Feels like running. Sometimes running toward yourself is braver than charging at an enemy. Before Ezra could respond, Iron nickered from the lean-to, not alarmed, but alert, listening. Ezra held up a hand for silence. He cocked his head, filtering through the sounds of the forest. Wind in the trees, the distant call of a raven, water dripping from icicles as the sun warmed them. Then he heard it. Voices, distant but growing closer, coming from the south trail. Inside, he said quietly. Now. They moved quickly. Naya gathered the foals, carried them back to the room, closed the door. Ezra took his position at the window, rifle ready, watching the trail. 10 minutes later, they emerged from the trees. But it was not Sutton and his men. It was a single rider, young, Apache, moving cautiously, hands visible, clearly unarmed. Ezra recognized the careful approach of someone who did not want to be shot. He stepped out onto the porch, rifle lowered but ready. The rider was a young man, maybe 19 or 20, with the lean build of someone who had grown up running through mountains. He wore traditional Apache clothing mixed with some white man's garments. A beaded vest over a cotton shirt, buckskin leggings. His hair was long, tied back with red cloth. His face was open, honest, marked with fear and determination in equal measure. He stopped his horse 30 feet from the cabin, raised both hands, palm out. "I come in peace," he called in Apache. "I'm looking for Naya Dalla." Ezra kept the rifle ready. "Who is asking?" "My name is Joseph. Joseph Quiet Stone. I was apprentice to Cocheta, the medicine man, before the soldiers came." The cabin door opened behind Ezra. Naya stepped out, leaning heavily on the doorframe. When she saw the young man, her eyes went wide. "Joseph?" She spoke in Apache, the words tumbling out. "You are alive? I thought Sutton killed everyone." The young man's face crumpled with relief. He slid off his horse, started forward, then stopped when Ezra's rifle came up. "Let him come," Naya said. "He is one of us." Ezra lowered the rifle. Joseph crossed the distance quickly, and Naya stepped down from the porch to meet him. They embraced, and Ezra saw tears on both their faces. They spoke rapidly in Apache, too fast for Ezra to follow. Finally, Naya turned to him. "He has been tracking Sutton. The colonel captured his family, his mother and 2 younger sisters. He is forcing Joseph to work as his tracker. If Joseph refuses, Sutton will kill them." Joseph looked at Ezra with haunted eyes. "I led them here.
he said in heavily accented English. "I am sorry. I had no choice. They have my family." He looked at Naya. "But I cannot do this anymore. I cannot help them hurt more of our people."
When Sutton said he was coming back with more men, I knew I had to warn you. I had to help somehow. "How many men?" Ezra asked. 15, maybe more. He is gathering everyone he can pay. Gunmen from the territory, a few ex-soldiers, men who do not care who they hurt, as long as they get paid. They are planning to come at dawn tomorrow. Surround the cabin. Burn you out if they have to. Ezra's mind raced, calculating. 15 men. Too many to fight directly. Not enough time to run. The terrain was the only advantage he had. "There is something else," Joseph continued. "There is a tunnel, an old escape route that the ancestors made, back when this area was still Apache land. The entrance is hidden, behind the rocks on the north side of the cabin. It runs underground for maybe 2 miles, comes out at the creek near the old cottonwood grove. Cocheta showed it to me once. He said it was for emergencies. This seems like an emergency." Ezra looked at Naya. "Did you know about this?" "My father mentioned old tunnels, but I never saw them. I did not know one was here." "Show me," Ezra said to Joseph. They walked around to the north side of the cabin, where a tumble of boulders leaned against the mountain slope. Joseph moved confidently, stepping between the rocks, pushing aside brush that had grown over the years. Behind a particularly large boulder, hidden in shadow, was a gap. Not large, maybe 3 feet high, but there. Ezra lit a match, held it into the darkness. The tunnel extended beyond the small pool of light, the walls rough-hewn stone and hard-packed earth. Cool air flowed out, carrying the smell of minerals and dampness. "It is narrow," Joseph said. "You would have to crawl in places, but it goes all the way through. I walked it once with Cocheta. It took maybe an hour." An escape route. A way to get Naya and the Foals out while Ezra stayed behind to create a diversion. It could work. They went back inside the cabin. Ezra laid out the plan. At midnight, Naya and Joseph would take the Foals through the tunnel. They would emerge at the creek, travel east under cover of darkness. There were Apache camps in the White Mountains, 3 days' ride, places where Sutton would not follow, where the wind horses would be protected. Meanwhile, Ezra would stay behind, make Sutton think everyone was still in the cabin, fight a delaying action, give them time to get away. "No," Naya said immediately. "I will not leave you to die alone. I am not planning to die. I am planning to make them wish they had never come here, and then disappear into the mountains. But I cannot do that if I am trying to protect you and 3 foals who cannot run." "He is right," Joseph said quietly. "The tunnel is the only way, and someone must stay to make them think we are all still here, or they will pursue immediately." Naya looked at Ezra for a long moment. Then she removed the turquoise bracelet from her wrist, the one that had belonged to her father. She held it out to him. "Take this," she said. "I cannot." "Yes, you can. My father wore this for 40 years. It protected him in battle. It reminded him who he was when the world tried to make him forget. Now I give it to you. When you wear it, you carry a piece of him, a piece of me. You do not fight alone." Ezra took the bracelet with trembling hands. The silver was warm from her skin. He slipped it onto his wrist. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for him. "If I do not see you again," Naya said, and her voice broke just slightly, "know that you gave me something I thought I had lost. Hope. The belief that not all white men are like Sutton, that there is still honor in the world. I will find you,
Ezra said. "After this is done, I will find you. I promise." She stepped close, placed both hands on his bearded face, and kissed him. It was brief, gentle, and it burned through him like fire. "Keep that promise," she whispered. Then she stepped back, gathered the Foals, and followed Joseph toward the hidden tunnel entrance. Ezra stood alone in the cabin as the sun began to set, painting the snow gold and red and purple. He touched the bracelet on his wrist, checked his rifle one more time, fed the fire until it roared. Outside, the temperature dropped. The stars came out, cold and distant and uncaring. Somewhere on the mountain, Sutton was gathering his army, and Ezra McAllister, 32 years old, alone again, prepared to do what he should have done 8 years ago at San Carlos. He prepared to stand his ground and fight. The old man stopped speaking. His voice, which had grown stronger as the story unfolded, faded into silence. On the porch of the cabin, the present reasserted itself. The October sun had climbed higher, burning away the last of the morning mist. Thomas sat motionless on the steps, his young face pale, his hands clenched together. Reverend Hutchins had his eyes closed, whether in prayer or simply absorbing the weight of what he had heard. Ezra could not tell. Ezra looked down at his hands. They were shaking slightly, the way they always did when he returned to that winter, to those moments when everything had balanced on the edge of a knife. He was 78 years old now, but in his mind he was 32 again, standing in a cabin that smelled of gun oil and fear, watching a woman and 3 foals disappear into darkness. "Grandfather," Thomas said quietly. The word seemed strange on his lips, formal, but also filled with a new kind of respect. What happened next? Ezra reached for his coffee cup, found it cold, set it down again. What always happens when men decide violence is the answer to their problems? Blood, pain, choices that echo for decades. "Tell me," Thomas said, "please." So Ezra continued, his voice rougher now, scraping against memories that still had sharp edges after 46 years. Midnight came cold and clear. Ezra stood at the hidden tunnel entrance, watching as Joseph helped Naya lower the foals, one by one, into the darkness. The white one, the smallest, the one Ezra had breathed life back into, looked at him with eyes that seemed too knowing for such a young creature. She whinnied softly, a sound of protest or farewell, he could not tell which. "Her name is Winter Spirit," Naya said, cradling the foal against her chest, despite the pain it caused her broken ribs. "The gray one with blue eyes is Skyheart. The darkest is Stormwalker. Remember their names. If I do not survive, someone should know who they were." "You will survive," Ezra said, with a certainty he did not feel. "And you?" "I am harder to kill than I look." Naya touched his face one more time, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw through his thick beard. Then she turned and followed Joseph into the tunnel, carrying Winter Spirit. Joseph had the other 2 foals bundled in his coat. They disappeared into the earth like spirits, returning to the place they were born. Ezra rolled the boulder back into place, covered the entrance with brush, scattered snow to hide the disturbance. Then he returned to the cabin and prepared for war. He built up the fire until the cabin glowed with heat and light. He placed his spare coat over a chair near the window, positioned to cast a shadow that might look like a person from outside. He scattered belongings around the room to suggest multiple occupants. Then he took up his position near the south window, rifle resting on the barricaded table, and waited. The attack came 2 hours before dawn. Ezra heard them first, the soft crunch of snow, the jingle of a bridle someone had forgotten to muffle. The whispered curse when someone stumbled.
Sutton's men were trying to be quiet, but 15 men, moving through forest in darkness, make sound no matter how careful they are. Iron, standing in the lean-to, let out a sharp whinny of warning. Ezra touched the turquoise bracelet on his wrist, feeling the smooth stones, drawing strength from the connection to something larger than himself. Then he settled the rifle stock against his shoulder and waited. The first man to break from the trees was Wade Clemens. Even in the darkness, Ezra recognized the thin silhouette, the predatory way he moved. Clemens advanced in a crouch, revolver in hand, scanning the cabin. Behind him came others, spreading out, trying to surround the building. Ezra let them come. Let them commit. Let them think they had the advantage. Then he fired. The Winchester cracked like thunder in the silent night. The muzzle flash lit up the window. Clemens threw himself sideways, rolled behind a tree. Ezra's bullet took the man behind Clemens in the shoulder, spinning him around. The man screamed, fell, clutching his arm. The night exploded into chaos. Gunfire erupted from the tree line. Bullets slammed into the cabin walls, punched through the window, whistled over Ezra's head. He ducked below the table, worked the rifle action, came up in a different spot, fired again. Another man went down, leg shattered. Ezra dropped back down, crawled to the east window, fired twice more. One of Sutton's men charged the cabin door. He hit the tripwire 15 feet out. His legs went out from under him, and he crashed face first into the frozen ground. Before he could rise, Ezra's next shot ended him. "Pull back!" Sutton's voice rang out from somewhere in the darkness. "Pull back and regroup!" The gunfire ceased. Ezra listened to them retreat, dragging their wounded. He counted his ammunition. 34 rounds left for the rifle. They would not be enough. Not against 15 men who now knew he could shoot. The silence stretched for 5 minutes. 10. Then Sutton's voice again, closer this time, coming from behind good cover. "McAllister, you have made your point. You are a capable fighter, but this is pointless. You cannot win. There is one of you and 14 of us now. Surrender the woman and the horses. I will let you live. You have my word as an officer." Ezra said nothing. He was moving through the cabin, checking angles, preparing for the next assault. "McAllister, be reasonable. What are you defending? An Apache squaw? 3 animals? Is that worth your life?" Ezra smiled grimly in the darkness. Sutton thought Naya was still here. Good. That meant they had not discovered the tunnel. Joseph and Naya had at least 2 hours head start now, maybe 3. Every minute he held these men here was another minute of safety for them. "I am going to count to 10, Sutton shouted. "Then we are coming in. One way or another." Ezra took a deep breath, centered himself. He thought of San Carlos, of standing frozen while children died, of 8 years of running from that moment, of finding Naya in the snow and choosing, finally, to act instead of watch. He would not run this time. 1! Ezra moved to the north window, the one facing the rocky slope. 2! He fired a single shot into the trees, making them think he was still at the south window. 3! He opened the north window silently, slipped through, dropped to the ground outside. 4! He was moving now, circling around through the rocks, using the terrain he knew like the back of his hand. 5! He reached the position he wanted, a cluster of boulders that gave him a clear view of the cabin's south side and the men gathering there. 6! He counted them. 12 visible. 2 must be guarding the flanks or watching the horses. 7! He aimed carefully,
picked out the man carrying a torch. Fire was their plan then.
Burn him out.
8, Ezra fired. The man with the torch went down. The torch fell into the snow and sputtered out. 9! Confusion, shouting. They realized he was not in the cabin anymore. 10! Take him! The men charged. 5 of them ran straight at the cabin door. 3 more circled toward the east, and Ezra, from his position in the rocks, began to fire methodically, not rapidly, carefully, making each shot count. The first man to reach the cabin door kicked it in. Ezra shot him through the doorway. The second hesitated, and Ezra shot him in the leg. The third one stumbled over the first 2 bodies, and Ezra let him go, saving ammunition. The men circling east hit the bear trap. The screaming was immediate and terrible. The iron jaws had closed on a man's leg just above the ankle, crushing bone. His companions stopped, frozen by the sound. Ezra shot one of them. The others scattered, dragging their injured friend. "He is in the rocks!" someone shouted. "North side!" Gunfire poured into the boulder field. Bullets ricocheted off stone, whining into the darkness. Ezra was already moving, crawling through gaps between the rocks, using shadows and terrain. He reached a new position, fired twice more, moved again. But there were too many of them, and they were learning. They stopped charging blindly. They found cover. They began to move with coordination, suppressing his position with gunfire while others advanced. A bullet clipped his shoulder, burning through the cloth of his shirt. Another grazed his thigh. He was bleeding now, though not badly. Not yet. He fired his last rifle round and threw the Winchester aside, drew his revolver. 20 rounds in that. Then it would come down to the knife and axe he had strapped to his belt. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east. False dawn. In an hour, it would be light enough to see clearly, and then his advantage would evaporate like morning dew. He heard boots on stone, someone climbing through the rocks, trying to flank him. Ezra waited, perfectly still. The man emerged around a boulder not 10 feet away. Ezra shot him twice. The man fell backward with a cry, but his position was given away. 3 more men converged. Ezra fired, dropped one, fired again, missed. The revolver's hammer clicked on an empty chamber. He had miscounted in the chaos. The 2 remaining men charged. Ezra met them with the knife in one hand, a chunk of rock in the other. The first man got the rock in his face, breaking his nose in a spray of blood. The second man tackled Ezra, and they went down together in a tangle of limbs. They fought in the dirt and snow, gouging and punching. The man was younger, stronger, but Ezra was fighting for more than himself. He was fighting for the woman who had forgiven him, for the Foals who carried the sacred, for the 8-year-old Apache girl who had looked at him at San Carlos and asked with her dying eyes why he had not helped. He got the knife under the man's ribs, felt the resistance, then the give. The man gasped, went heavy. Ezra pushed him off, stood up, breathing hard, and found himself facing Colonel James Sutton. The older man stood 20 feet away, revolver drawn and aimed at Ezra's chest. Blood ran from a cut on Sutton's forehead. His fine coat was torn and dirty, but his hands were steady. Behind him, the sun was rising, painting the sky pink and gold. "Enough," Sutton said quietly. "It is over, McAllister. You fought well. Better than I expected. But it ends here." Ezra said nothing. He still had the knife, but a knife was useless against a drawn gun. "Where is she?" Sutton asked. "The woman, the horses. They are not in the cabin. We searched it."
Ezra smiled, tasting blood in his mouth. "Gone, hours ago. You will never find them now." Sutton's face hardened. "There is no way out of this canyon except the trail we are watching." "You are wrong. But by the time you figure that out, they will be so far into the mountains you could search for a year and never find them." For the first time, Sutton's composure cracked. His jaw clenched. The revolver shook slightly. "You have cost me greatly, Mr. McAllister. Good men dead. A fortune in horses lost. For what? For a woman you barely know? For animals? For a choice," Ezra said. "For the chance to stand for something instead of watching evil happen and doing nothing." "Noble," Sutton said, his voice dripping with contempt. "And pointless. Nobility does not stop bullets. It does not win wars. It does not build empires. You are a relic, McAllister. A man who does not understand that the world is changing, that the old ways are dying, that men like me are the future." "Maybe," Ezra said, "but you will never have those horses, and that will eat at you for the rest of your life, knowing you failed, knowing that one man on a mountain stopped you." Sutton raised the revolver higher, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Any last words?" Before Ezra could answer, a sound split the morning air. A neigh, high and wild and impossibly pure. Not the sound a normal horse makes, something else, something older. Sutton's head turned toward the sound. His eyes widened. On the ridge above them, silhouetted against the rising sun, stood 3 horses. Not the foals. These were full-grown, magnificent, their coats gleaming silver and white and gray. The spiral marks on their foreheads blazed with blue light, visible even in the dawn. And riding the largest one, her hair streaming behind her like a black banner, was Naya. "No," Sutton whispered. "Impossible." The wind horses began to descend the slope, moving with inhuman speed and grace. Beside Naya rode Joseph, and behind them, barely visible in the growing light, were more riders, Apache warriors, 20 of them, 30, armed with rifles and bows, and the cold fury of a people who had lost too much. Ezra understood immediately. The tunnel had not led to escape. It had led to reinforcements. To Naya's people, who had been waiting, who had been gathering, who had come when she called, because the wind horses were too important to lose. Sutton understood, too. He turned back to Ezra, raising the revolver again, determined to at least claim this one victory. The shot came from Ezra's left. Dutch Keller, the big enforcer, had survived the battle and found a position in the rocks. His rifle cracked. Ezra felt the impact, a sledgehammer blow to his chest that drove him backward. He hit the ground hard, the sky wheeling above him. But as he fell, he saw something else. Saw Wade Clemens emerge from cover, taking aim at Naya. Saw her turn, too slow, trapped on the slope. Saw the danger she was in. And Ezra, dying, bleeding out onto the snow, made his last choice. He grabbed the revolver that had fallen from Sutton's grip when the colonel dove for cover, raised it with a hand that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, aimed not at Sutton, not at Keller, at Clemens. He fired once. The bullet took Clemens in the chest, just as the man's finger tightened on his trigger. Clemens's shot went wild, whining off into space. He fell backward off the rock he had climbed, landing with a sound Ezra heard even as his own vision began to fade. Naya was safe. The Foals were safe. That was enough.
But Clemens was not finished. Burned, bleeding, half his face charred black, the thin man crawled toward a fallen rifle. His skeletal fingers closed around the barrel. He raised it with shaking hands, aiming not at Ezra, but at Naya on the ridge. Ezra tried to shout, but blood filled his mouth. Then Iron appeared.
The gray-black stallion, who had carried Ezra through 8 years of solitude, who had found Naya in the snow, who had never once failed his rider, charged from the tree line, not toward Ezra, toward Clemens. Clemens's rifle cracked. The bullet punched through Iron's chest, just behind the shoulder. The stallion stumbled, but did not stop. 800 pounds of loyal fury crashed into Clemens. Hooves came down once, twice. Bone cracked. Clemens's scream cut off. Iron stood over the body, sides heaving, blood streaming down his gray coat, turning it black. Then his legs buckled. He fell beside Ezra, their blood mixing in the snow. "No," Ezra whispered, reaching out with his one working arm. "Not you, boy. Please, God, not you." Iron's dark eyes found Ezra's. The stallion's breath came in ragged gasps. He tried to lift his head, failed. His muzzle touched Ezra's hand one last time. Then the light went out of those eyes. 14 years together, ended in one heartbeat. Iron had given everything. For him, for Naya, for creatures he did not even understand. Ezra closed his eyes. The voice of Thomas brought him back to the present. "But you did not die," the boy said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are here. You survived." Ezra looked at his grandson, this boy who carried McAllister blood, but had grown up soft, protected, unbroken by the kind of choices that forge or destroy a man. "Barely," Ezra said. "Keller's bullet collapsed my lung and broke 2 ribs. By the time Naya reached me, I was drowning in my own blood. Iron saved my life one last time that morning, took a bullet meant for Naya, killed the man who would have killed her, then died beside me in the snow. I buried him on that mountain, under a stand of pines where he used to graze, marked his grave with river stones. Your grandmother never understood why I cried harder at that burial than I did at most human funerals. But Iron was more than a horse. He was the brother I never had, the friend who never judged, the companion who saw me at my worst and stayed anyway. She saved me, used Apache medicine, herbs and rituals I still do not fully understand, kept me alive for 3 days while her people hunted down Sutton and what remained of his men. Sutton tried to escape. He rode south into the desert with 2 remaining men. The Apache warriors tracked them for 3 days. Joseph found Sutton on the 4th day, collapsed beside a dried-up water hole, his horse dead beside him. He was still alive, barely, clutching an empty canteen. His last words were cursing the wind horses, cursing the Apache, cursing me. Then he died. They buried him there in the sand. No marker, no mourning. The desert claimed him, as it should. Keller they caught. The Apache dealt with him in their own way. I did not ask for details. Joseph's family was found the same day I was shot. Sutton had kept them locked in a stone cellar near his base camp, 15 miles south. They were starving, terrified, but alive. The Apache warriors freed them. Joseph's mother wept when she saw him. His 2 little sisters clung to him for hours. He told me later, while I was healing, that was the moment he forgave himself for leading Sutton to us. He had saved them. That was what mattered. "And Naya?" Thomas asked. "The Foals?" Ezra's face hardened, the wrinkles deepening into canyons. "She stayed with me for 2 weeks while I healed. Then she said she had to go. Had to take the wind horses back to her people's sacred places. Had to fulfill her father's last wishes. I asked her to stay, begged her, but she said no. Said our worlds were too different, that I belonged to the mountains and she belonged to the desert, that what we had was beautiful, but could not last." He stood slowly, his old joints creaking, walked to the edge of the porch. The canyon spread below him, vast and empty and achingly beautiful. "She gave me this bracelet, told me it would protect me, told me to find a good woman, build a life, be happy. Then she rode away with the 3 foals, and I never saw her again." "Never?" Thomas's voice was barely a whisper. "I tried," Ezra said, his voice breaking. "God knows I tried. I went to every Apache settlement in Arizona, asked about her, about the wind horses. No one would tell me anything, or maybe they genuinely did not know. The Apache are good at keeping secrets when they want to." He turned back to face Thomas and the Reverend. "In 1919, I came down from the mountain, met your grandmother Clara at a church social. She was kind, patient. She knew I carried ghosts, but she loved me anyway. We married, built a life. It was good, not perfect, not what I had dreamed, but good. She passed in 1950, after 31 years together. Cancer. She went peacefully, holding my hand, telling me it was all right to remember Naya, that she had never been jealous of a ghost." His voice grew softer. "In 1923, I got a letter from a mission in White Mountain. It said Naya had died of tuberculosis. Said she had asked them to notify me. Said in her last days she spoke of a mountain man with a black beard who had saved her life and taught her that courage was choosing to act even when afraid." Tears ran down the old man's weathered face, cutting tracks through the wrinkles. "I never got to tell her what she meant to me. Never got to thank her properly for giving me back my soul. Never got to see what became of those foals, those sacred creatures we fought so hard to protect." He touched the bracelet on his wrist. "All I had was this, and the memory, and the question of whether any of it mattered." Thomas stood, crossed to his grandfather, placed a hand on the old man's shoulder. "It mattered. You saved them. You stood when you could have run. You fought when you could have surrendered. That matters." "Does it?" Ezra asked, and his voice was the voice of a man who had asked himself the same question for 46 years. 3 people died in that fight. Good men, maybe, before Sutton corrupted them. For what? 3 horses? 1 woman? "For honor," the Reverend said, speaking for the first time in an hour. "For redemption. For the chance to be better than you were. Those are not small things, Ezra. Those are the things that separate us from animals." Ezra looked at him, then at Thomas. "Your grandmother left instructions for you, boy. That is why the Reverend brought you here. There is something in the barn, something I have kept for 36 years, since 1919, when I finally had money enough to purchase it. Your grandmother knew about it. She understood why I had to have it, even though it hurt her to know I kept this shrine to another woman." He led them around the cabin to the old barn. The door creaked on rusted hinges. Inside, it smelled of hay and leather and time. Ezra moved to the back stall, the one he never used, the one that had been empty for as long as Thomas could remember visiting as a small child. But it was not empty now. A horse stood there. Young, perhaps 12 years old,
her coat silver-gray like morning mist, eyes of pale blue that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. On her forehead, clear and bright despite her youth, was a mark, a spiral, glowing faintly even in the dim barn light. "Dawn Keeper," Ezra whispered. "Great-granddaughter of Skyheart. 4 generations removed, but the bloodline runs true." Thomas gasped. The Reverend made the sign of the cross. "I found Skyheart at a horse auction in 1925, Ezra said. "She was 16 then, still strong. An Apache family was selling their herd. Hard times. Depression coming. I recognized her immediately. Those blue eyes. That mark. I paid everything I had saved in 6 years. Brought her here." He paused, his hand resting on Dawn Keeper's neck. Skyheart lived until 1943, 34 years old, longer than any normal horse. She gave me 5 foals before she died. Each carried the mark. Each had the gift. I kept one, sold the others only to people I trusted, sent the money to Apache communities, anonymously. He gestured to the young mare before them. "This is Dawn Keeper, born in 1943, the year Skyheart died. Daughter of Skyheart's daughter. The bloodline continues unbroken, and she will be yours to protect when I am gone." He opened the stall door. The young mare walked out, moving with the grace that marked her sacred bloodline. She came directly to Ezra, nuzzled his hand. He stroked her muzzle, and for a moment he was young again, standing in a cabin with a woman who forgave him and foals who glowed with sacred light. "Come with me," Ezra said. "There is one more you must meet." They walked to the far pasture, boots crunching through dry grass. The sun was warm now, chasing away the morning chill. Thomas followed his grandfather, the Reverend trailing behind. At the pasture fence, Ezra stopped. He pointed. There, grazing alone in a pool of golden light, stood a young mare. 3 years old, coat pure white like fresh snow, mane silver as moonlight. She raised her head at their approach. Her eyes were the color of the desert sky at dawn, pale blue with flecks of gold. And on her forehead, clear and bright as a brand, blazed the spiral mark. "Morning Star," Ezra whispered. The mare walked toward them, not cautiously, with purpose. She stopped at the fence, looking directly at Thomas. Her ears pricked forward. She lowered her head and blew softly through her nostrils. An invitation. "Touch her," Ezra said quietly. "Let her choose." Thomas reached out with a trembling hand. His fingers brushed the spiral mark on her forehead. The mark flared bright blue, not faint, not subtle, brilliant as lightning. Thomas gasped, but did not pull away. Warmth flooded through his palm, up his arm, into his chest. For one impossible moment, he saw things. Mountains, wind, a woman with black hair singing, a gray-black stallion standing in snow, 3 tiny foals glowing with inner light. Then it faded. Morning Star pressed her forehead against Thomas's palm and nickered softly. "She has chosen you," Ezra said, his voice thick. "Just as Winter Spirit chose me 46 years ago. You are her keeper now, her protector. The sacred bloodline is in your hands." Thomas looked at his grandfather, tears streaming down his young face. "I will not fail her, or you, or Naya. I promise." Ezra placed his weathered hand over Thomas's. "Then you are already a better man than I was at your age." "You will not die for a long time yet," Thomas said. I am 78 years old, boy. I have lived longer than I deserved. I am ready. He looked at Skyheart one more time. I am ready. They walked back to the cabin together. 3 generations, linked by blood and story. The sun was high now, burning away the last remnants of morning. Somewhere in the distant mountains, a hawk cried. The aspens rustled in a wind that carried the smell of coming winter. Ezra sat in his rocking chair. Thomas sat on the steps. The Reverend stood with his hands clasped, looking like he wanted to say something pastoral, but could not find the words. Thomas reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age, edges worn soft from handling. "Grandfather," he said quietly. "Grandmother's letter, the one she left with the bracelet. You should read it." Ezra took it with hands that shook. He recognized Clara's handwriting immediately. Elegant, careful, written when she knew death was coming. He unfolded it slowly, read. "My dearest Ezra, if you are reading this, I am gone. Do not mourn over long. We had good years, you and I, better than many. I knew what I was getting when I married you. A man with ghosts, a man with a past he could not outrun. I married you anyway, because I saw what she saw. A good man trying to be better. I kept the bracelet all these years. I knew what it meant. I was never jealous of Naya. How could I be jealous of a woman who saved your soul? She gave you back to the world. I only received what she had already redeemed." Thomas needs to know this story. He needs to know where he comes from. He needs to understand that courage is not absence of fear. It is acting despite fear, because someone weaker needs you to. The wind horses are his now. Protect the bloodline. Honor the sacred. Finish what you and she started. You gave me 31 years of loyalty and kindness. That is more than most women ever receive. I died loved. That is enough. Your Clara. Ezra folded the letter carefully, pressed it to his chest. His shoulders shook. The Reverend placed a hand on his shoulder, but said nothing. "She knew," Ezra whispered. "All these years. She knew, and she never held it against me." "She loved you," Thomas said simply. "Yes," Ezra said, "and I loved her. Just differently. Not less. Just different." He looked at Thomas through tears. "Never think loving one person means you cannot honor another. The heart is not so small." "I learned something on that mountain in 1909, Ezra said finally. "Learned it the hard way. Learned it in blood and pain and loss. Redemption is not about erasing the past. You cannot undo what you have done. San Carlos happened. I was part of it. That is truth that no amount of fighting or sacrifice can change." He looked at Thomas with eyes that had seen too much, but somehow remained gentle. "But redemption is about what you do after you fall. Do you stay down? Do you give up? Do you let the guilt eat you until you are hollow? Or do you stand up, bloody and broken, and try to do better? Try to be worthy of the second chance you have been given?" "You stood up," Thomas said. "I tried to. I am still trying, every day. That is all any man can do. Try to be worthy of the people who believed in him when he did not believe in himself." He touched the turquoise bracelet one more time. "Naya believed in me. She saw something in a broken man hiding on a mountain, saw past the guilt and fear to something worth saving.
And because she believed, I learned to believe too. Learned that courage is not being unafraid. Courage is being terrified and acting anyway, because someone is counting on you. He stood, moved to the edge of the porch, looked out at the canyon one last time. She died in 1923, 32 years ago, and I have thought about her every single day since. Wondered what she would think of the man I became.
Wondered if I honored her sacrifice. Wondered if keeping these horses alive was enough to balance the scales. It was enough, the Reverend said quietly. It was more than enough. Ezra smiled, a sad smile, the smile of a man who has lived with ghosts so long they have become friends. "Maybe," he said. "We will see soon enough. When I meet her again. When I can finally tell her what I should have said in 1909. That she saved me. Not just from sudden. From myself. From becoming a man who could watch children die and feel nothing." He turned back to Thomas. "You have that same choice now, boy. Every day. To be the kind of man who stands for something, who protects those who cannot protect themselves, who chooses courage even when it costs everything. The wind horses are your test, your chance to prove you are more than just a name, more than just blood. You are what you choose to be. Nothing more, nothing less." Thomas stood, walked to his grandfather, and embraced him. The old man was stiff at first, unused to such displays. Then he relaxed, held his grandson, and allowed himself a moment of peace. "I will not fail them," Thomas said, "or you, or her. I promise." "Then you are already a better man than I was at your age," Ezra said. They stood together on the porch as the sun climbed higher, warming the mountain, chasing the cold away. Somewhere in the distance, Morning Star whinnied, a sound of joy and freedom. And for just a moment, Ezra could have sworn he heard another voice carried on the wind, a woman's voice, singing in Apache, the old songs, the sacred songs, the songs that call the spirits home. He closed his eyes and smiled. And finally, after 46 years, Ezra McAllister let himself believe that he was forgiven.